They tell you about the grief. They tell you about the shock, the denial, and the anger. But nobody warns you about the silence. It has a weight to it, a physical presence that settles into the corners of the room and presses down on your chest. My name is Margaret, and when my husband, Richard, died after 42 years of marriage, the silence became my roommate. It sat in his empty chair at the breakfast table, it slept on his side of the bed. 18 months ago, my life was dismantled. Richard had always been the steward of our world, the finances, the maintenance, the heavy lifting. I had relied on him entirely, perhaps too much. When the dust settled after the funeral, the reality was a cold slap to the face. The medical bills from his long illness had hollowed out our savings like termites in wood. The life insurance, which we thought was substantial, barely covered the burial costs. I was 63, grieving, and destitute. My children were distant echoes, a daughter in Seattle with her own busy life, a son in Texas fighting his own battles. I couldn't burden them. So, I did the only thing I could. I sold the home where we had raised our babies and moved into a shoebox apartment on the edge of Minneapolis. It was a restart button I never wanted to press. I needed income, but the job market isn't exactly clamoring for a woman with a bad hip and a resume that hasn't been updated since the 80s. Eventually, the Good Shepherd Senior Center took pity on me. They needed a receptionist. It was part-time, minimum wage, and exhausting, but it forced me to put on clothes and leave the apartment. It gave me a destination to save money and help my hip. I took the bus, but I always hopped off 2 stops early. That walk past the public library became my sanctuary. It was there that I first saw him. He was a fixture of the street, an older black man with hair like spun cotton and a jacket that had seen better decades. He sat on the same bench every morning with a small paper cup, never begging, just existing. He possessed a quiet dignity that reminded me of my father, a posture that said he was down, but not defeated. The first time I approached him, I was nervous. I dropped a $5 bill into his cup, muttering a clumsy greeting. He looked up, and his eyes were pools of warmth. "God bless you, ma'am," he said. "You have a kind heart." It wasn't a generic line, he said it like he saw me. That moment sparked a routine. Every morning, I stopped. We exchanged names. I learned he was Samuel, a former history teacher who had lost his pension to fraud and his home to gentrification. He was brilliant and kind, and the injustice of his situation made my blood boil. We became friends in that strange, transient way, sharing fragments of our lives on a cold sidewalk. But I didn't know that our morning ritual was being watched. I didn't know that by stopping to speak to Samuel, I was stepping onto a chessboard I didn't even know existed. I thought I was just being kind to a lonely stranger, but I had no idea that Samuel was the only thing standing between me and a violent death. And on a freezing Tuesday morning, everything changed. For nearly a year, this was our rhythm. The seasons painted the city in different shades, the humid gold of summer fading into the crisp rust of autumn, eventually surrendering to a Minnesota winter that seemed determined to never end. Life, in its own slow way, was improving. My daughter called with news of a pregnancy. I received a small raise at the center. I began to feel like I was treading water rather than drowning. Then came that Tuesday in late March. The snow was melting into gray slush, and the air held the damp promise of spring. I stepped off the bus and walked toward the library, expecting to see Samuel sitting on his bench with his paper cup. But the scene was wrong. Samuel wasn't sitting. He was pacing, his posture rigid, his eyes darting frantically across the street. When he saw me, he didn't offer his usual wave. He rushed toward me, closing the distance with a speed that startled me. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me toward the brick wall of the library, out of the flow of pedestrian traffic. "Mrs. Margaret," he hissed, his voice trembling not with cold, but with urgency. "You need to listen to me closely." "Samuel? What is it? Are you ill?" "No," he snapped, cutting me off. "This isn't about me. It's about you. It's about your job. You are in danger." I stared at him, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. What are you talking about? I can't explain it all right now, there isn't time. But you have to promise me something. Do not go home tonight. Sleep anywhere else. A hotel, a friend's house, a shelter. Just don't go to your apartment. You're scaring me, Samuel. How do you know about my apartment? How do you know about my job? He leaned in, his eyes wide and pleading. I know things because people think I'm part of the scenery. They talk freely around a homeless man because they think I'm invisible. They think I'm stupid. But I listen. And what I heard. He trailed off, looking over his shoulder. Watch the new bookkeeper. The redhead. Watch what she does with the donation logs. But mostly, just stay away from home tonight. Please. He released me and stepped back, his face masking over into a neutral expression as a police car drove past. Go to work. Act normal. Do not ask questions. I will explain tomorrow. I walked the rest of the way to the Good Shepherd Senior Center in a daze. My mind was spinning. The new bookkeeper. Tiffany Reynolds. She had started 3 months ago, young, vibrant, with bright red hair and a smile that seemed permanently affixed to her face. She was the picture of innocence. And Patricia Holloway, our director, was a pillar of the community. She had run the center for 12 years. I respected her. I trusted her. I sat at my desk, answering phones mechanically. But every time Tiffany walked by, a chill ran down my spine. Was Samuel having a mental break? Or was something truly rotting beneath the surface of this place? I spent the whole morning trying to convince myself that Samuel was just confused, that my boring job was perfectly safe. Then my boss called me into her office and closed the door, and the look on her face told me that the nightmare had just begun. Around lunchtime, Patricia Holloway stepped out of her office. She was a woman who commanded respect without raising her voice, always dressed in sensible suits, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. She stopped at my desk, her expression unreadable. Margaret, do you have a moment? I need to speak with you in private. My stomach did a slow roll. I followed her into the office, and the sound of the door clicking shut behind us felt ominously final. She gestured for me to sit. I'm going to be direct because I value you, Patricia started, leaning forward over her mahogany desk. I've discovered some irregularities in our finances. Serious ones. I tried to keep my face neutral, remembering Samuel's warning. Act normal. Irregularities? Theft, Margaret. We are missing nearly $40,000 from the donation fund over the last quarter. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I suspect someone on the inside. I've called in a forensic auditor, and the police will be involved by the end of the week. But I need to ask you, have you seen anyone accessing the records who shouldn't be? Any strange behavior from the staff? She was watching me closely. Too closely. Was she asking because she trusted me, or was she fishing to see if I knew her secret? If Samuel was right, she wasn't the victim, she was the architect. No, I lied, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I haven't noticed anything. I'm just the receptionist, Patricia. I don't look at the books. Good, she said, though her eyes remained cold. That's good. I just wanted to warn you that interviews will be happening. I know you'll cooperate. I left the office on shaky legs. The rest of the day was a blur of paranoia. Every time Tiffany, the young bookkeeper, smiled at me, it looked like a predator baring its teeth. By 5 o'clock, I was a nervous wreck. Samuel had said, "Don't go home." It felt ridiculous. I was a 64-year-old widow, I wasn't a character in a spy novel. But the fear in Samuel's eyes had been real. Instead of taking the bus to my apartment, I walked to a budget motel a mile away. I paid cash for a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, chiding myself for wasting money I didn't have on a motel room based on the ramblings of a homeless man. I eventually drifted into a fitful sleep. My phone rang at 2:14 a.m. The screen was bright in the dark room. Unknown number. Hello? I whispered. Mrs. Chen? This is Sergeant Rivera with the Minneapolis Police Department. My blood turned to ice. Yes? We're calling about your residence. There has been a severe fire at your apartment complex. It appears to have started in your unit. We need to know if you are currently inside the building. I couldn't breathe. The room spun. No, I managed to choke out. No, I'm staying with a friend tonight. That is incredibly fortunate, ma'am. The damage is total. We're going to need you to come down to the station in the morning. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of the cheap mattress, shivering violently. It wasn't an accident. Samuel knew. If I had gone home, I would be dead. I sat in that dark motel room realizing that the woman I worked for had just tried to burn me alive to cover her tracks. But what I didn't know was that Samuel had seen the whole thing, and he had the photos to prove it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every shadow in the room looked like a threat, every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. As soon as the sun began to bleed gray light into the sky, I left the motel. I didn't go to the police station. I went to the library. Samuel was there. He wasn't sitting, he was standing by the curb, wringing his hands, looking down the street where my bus usually arrived. When he saw me walking toward him, his whole body sagged with relief. He practically collapsed onto the bench. "You're alive," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Thank God. I was so afraid you hadn't listened." I sat down next to him, disregarding the damp wood. "There was a fire, Samuel." "My apartment, they said it started in my unit." "I know," he said grimly. He reached into the inner pocket of his dirty green jacket and pulled out a battered composition notebook, the kind with the black and white marble cover. "I know because I heard them planning it." He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with neat, cramped handwriting. Dates, times, snippets of conversation. "I've been tracking them for 3 weeks," Samuel explained. "Ever since I heard 2 men talking on this very bench. They didn't see me, or they didn't care. Men in suits don't lower their voices for people like me. They were discussing cleaning up loose ends at the Good Shepherd Center." He flipped a page. "They mentioned the money. Millions, Margaret. Not thousands. They've been skimming from 4 different centers across the state. And then, 2 days ago, they mentioned a problem. They said the receptionist, you, was asking questions. Which I knew wasn't true, but they were paranoid. They needed a scapegoat." I felt sick. "So they were going to kill me?" "Kill you, and frame you," Samuel corrected. "Make it look like you started the fire by accident, or maybe on purpose. Dead women can't defend themselves against embezzlement charges. If you died in that fire, all the missing money would be pinned on you." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out an ancient flip phone. "I followed them," he said, a glint of pride in his eyes. "The tall man, Patricia's brother, I think, met with another man in the alley behind the coffee shop. I got close. I took pictures." He pressed a button and showed me the grainy screen. It was unmistakably Patricia Holloway, standing next to a tall, sharp-faced man, handing an envelope to a third figure in a hoodie. "That's the man who set the fire," Samuel said, pointing to the hooded figure. "I heard them give him your address." I looked at Samuel, really looked at him. This man, who had nothing, who slept on concrete and ate what he could find, had risked his life to shadow a criminal ring just to save mine. "Why?" I asked, tears spilling over. "Why did you do this for me?" He smiled, and for a moment, he looked like the history teacher he used to be. "Because you saw me, Mrs. Margaret. For a year, you looked me in the eye. You treated me like a human being. That's rare. And I decided I wasn't going to let them extinguish the one light I had in my day." Samuel handed me the notebook and the phone, the only weapons we had against $1 million criminal empire. Go to the police, he told me. I'll be fine. But as I walked away, I had a terrible feeling that for Samuel, the danger was far from over. Walking into the Minneapolis Police Department felt like stepping into another world. I was a ghost from a life that had burned down, clutching a homeless man's notebook and a cracked flip phone. I must have looked insane. The first officer I spoke to certainly thought so. But I repeated Samuel's name and the words arson and Good Shepherd Center until a detective with tired eyes led me to a small, gray interrogation room. He was skeptical, his face a mask of professional boredom. He listened as I recounted the story, his expression unchanging. He probably thought I was a disgruntled employee, or worse, an accomplice trying to cut a deal. But then I opened the notebook. As the detective read Samuel's meticulous entries, the license plate numbers, the descriptions of the men, the verbatim snippets of conversation he'd overheard, the boredom on his face slowly melted away, replaced by sharp focus. When I showed him the photos on the flip phone, the grainy image of Patricia Holloway in a dark alley, his entire posture changed. He called another detective into the room. Then another. Samuel's evidence was the key that unlocked everything. It was a first-hand account from a witness no one had ever thought to look for. The investigation exploded. What they uncovered was a web of corruption far more extensive than I could have imagined. Patricia, her financial consultant brother, and her niece Tiffany weren't just skimming from one center, they were running a sophisticated criminal enterprise across the state, siphoning millions from the very programs meant to protect the elderly. My story, corroborated by the fire investigators' report of accelerants in my apartment, provided the motive. They were cleaning house, preparing to disappear, and I was the final loose end to be tied up and set ablaze. Within 48 hours, the arrests began. I watched on the news as Patricia Holloway, the woman I had trusted, was led from her suburban home in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and indignation. Her brother and Tiffany were arrested soon after. The man in the hoodie, the arsonist, was found trying to board a bus to Mexico. Justice was swift and absolute. But as the legal storm raged, a personal one was brewing inside me. Samuel. He had vanished. I went to his bench outside the library, but it was empty. I checked the shelters, showing his photo to anyone who would look. No one had seen him since the morning he'd given me the notebook. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Had they found him? Had they silenced the one witness who could bring them down? For 3 frantic days, I searched, my fear growing with every passing hour. Finally, a call from a social worker gave me an address, Hennepin County Medical Center. He was in the charity ward, looking small and fragile in the sterile white bed, tubes and wires snaking from his arms. He had collapsed on the street from severe dehydration and kidney failure. The doctor told me he was suffering from years of untreated diabetes and malnutrition. He hadn't been attacked by criminals, he had been attacked by poverty, by the slow, grinding indifference of the world. As I sat by his bed, holding his thin, cold hand, I realized that I had a choice. I could let the system that had failed him continue to do so, or I could become the advocate he never had. The criminals were in jail, but my real fight was just beginning. "Don't cry, Mrs. Margaret," Samuel whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "It's not your fault. An old engine can only run so long without a tune-up." I looked at this man who had saved my life, now fading away in a public hospital, and a fierce, protective anger surged through me. It wasn't enough to see Patricia in prison. Justice for Samuel had to mean more than just punishing the guilty, it had to mean lifting up the innocent. "No," I told him, wiping my eyes. "This isn't the end of your story, Samuel Washington. I won't allow it." For the next month, I became a warrior. My grief and loneliness were forged into a weapon. I spent my days on the phone and my nights writing letters. I harassed social services departments, legal aid clinics, and housing authorities. I became a familiar, unignorable presence in bureaucratic offices. I told Samuel's story to anyone who would listen, the local news reporters, city council members, even the school district where he had taught for 35 years. I told them about the history teacher who lost his pension, the man who had shaped thousands of young minds only to be forgotten by the system he had served. I told them about the homeless man who possessed more integrity than the city's most respected philanthropists. And a strange thing happened. People listened. The story of the homeless hero was a ripple that grew into a wave. The news segment went viral. Donations poured into a fund I had set up. A high-powered law firm took on his pension case pro bono, discovering the fraud was not just a bad investment but a criminal conspiracy. A non-profit that built housing for veterans found him a small, subsidized apartment just a few blocks from the library. The school district, embarrassed by the publicity, announced the creation of the Samuel Washington Scholarship Fund for future historians. The day he was discharged from the hospital, I was there to pick him up. I drove him to his new apartment. It was small and simple, but it was clean, safe, and warm. It was a home. We spent the afternoon unpacking donated furniture and books. I hung the one framed photo he had kept with him all those years on the street, a smiling picture of his late wife, Eleanor. He sat in a comfortable armchair, looking around the room with a dazed expression, as if he couldn't believe it was real. "Margaret," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do all this." I sat on the ottoman across from him. "Yes, Samuel. I did. You saved my life. Not just from the fire, but from the silence. You gave me a purpose when I thought mine was over. We saved each other." He was quiet for a long time, watching the sunlight stream through his new window. "I used to teach my students about the great man theory of history," he said softly. "The idea that history is shaped by powerful kings and generals. But I always told them it was wrong. History is shaped by the small choices of ordinary people. An act of kindness, an act of courage, they create tremors that can topple empires." He was right. Our story began with a $5 bill and a quiet hello. It was a tiny choice that led to justice, to a new home, and to a friendship that redefined my life. I thought our adventure was over, but Samuel had one last lesson to teach me. I am 65 now. Life has found a new rhythm, a quiet melody that I never expected. My daughter gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and holding my granddaughter for the first time felt like the mending of a broken bone in my soul. I still work at a senior center, a different one, of course, and I keep a close eye on the accounting. I am no longer just a receptionist, I am a guardian. Every morning, I still take the bus, but my walk is different. It's no longer a somber march to a dreary job. It's a pilgrimage. My route takes me to a clean, well-kept apartment building where I have a standing coffee date with my best friend. Samuel is thriving. With proper medical care, his diabetes is under control. He has regained his strength and the spark in his eyes is brighter than ever. He volunteers at the public library, the very place that once served as his only shelter. He tutors children, helping them with their history homework, teaching them about justice, and about the quiet power of paying attention to the world around them. Sometimes, when we're sitting in his sunny living room, people will ask me what I learned from the whole ordeal. They expect a story about the darkness in the world, a cautionary tale about crime and betrayal. But that's not the lesson I carry with me. What I learned is that kindness is a currency. It's an investment. Every small act, every moment of connection, every time you choose to see the humanity in someone others have rendered invisible, you are starting a ripple. You never know how far it will travel. You never know if that small ripple will grow into a wave that comes back to save you when you are drowning. I was a lonely widow, and Samuel Washington was a homeless man. On the surface, we were powerless. But together, our small connection exposed a massive criminal conspiracy and, more importantly, we built a friendship that became the foundation of our new lives. It all started because I chose not to walk past his bench one morning. It all started with $5 and a kind word. So that is the story I want to share. Whoever you are, wherever you are, don't underestimate the power you hold. Stop for the person everyone else ignores. Offer a smile. Look them in the eye. That simple choice, that tiny ripple, might just be the thing that changes the world. It certainly changed mine. Thank you so much for watching and for letting me share this incredible story with you. Your support means the world.